Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the track session of day two of the DSCI Financial Security Conclave, the FinSec Conclave. This track has rather a very important theme, earmarked. What we are discussing is we are talking about the operational excellence for two aspects pertaining to the digital finance. One is the resiliency part, and another is the incident response part. Right. So, in order to carry this discussion forward, let me invite a very eminent panel to join me on the stage. Let me start with Mr. Harish Goel, Director IT Security and Compliance for Publicis Groupe. Can we have Harish on stage, please? Hi, Harish. Good afternoon. Then can we have Ms. Jyoti Ruparel, ex-Chief Risk Officer for Genpact? Can we have Jyoti on stage, please? Hi, Jyoti. Welcome. Then we have Mr. Navaneethan, M, CISO and Head IT for Groww. Can we have Mr. Navaneethan on stage? Hi, Navaneethan. Good afternoon. Then can we have Ms. Neeti Malik, Associate Director, Business Resilience, Crisis Management and Disaster Recovery Global for Concentrix. Hi, Neeti. Good afternoon.
Good
And last
afternoon.
but not the least, we'll be joined by Mr. Sanjay Manwani, MySQL India Senior Director, MySQL. I believe Sanjay would be with us in a bit. Meanwhile, let me get started. Do we have Sanjay? Or Okay, so Mr. Sanjay would be joining us shortly. As I mentioned at the beginning, we want to deliberate on two very fundamental aspects when it comes to digital finance, which we all know has been proliferating at a very rapid pace. So I think it's important for us to deliberate what kind of risks exist in the overall financial transaction processing ecosystem, and that is just a start. When we have identified that, it's very important to understand what are some of those, how some of those risks are actually translating into incidents and events. And once we have the incidents, events, intrusions and attempts plaguing the digital financial transaction ecosystem, then it's very important for us to understand how we as an industry are collectively thinking of effective incident management frameworks, policies, and at the same time how we are taking care of the resiliency part, which has become very prominent, especially post pandemic. Right. So let me quickly get started with the panel without any further ado. Jyoti, I would like to come to you first. As I mentioned, there has been proliferation of fintechs across the business processes. So, given that you hail from the risk background, so in your opinion, what are the key risks that need to be accounted for with respect to digital finance and overall transaction processing ecosystem?
Sure, thanks, Aditya. I hope you can hear me clear.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, Aditya and everyone else on the panel and the audience, I think one of the things I personally feel is that while fintechs have caused a disruption in the industry and finance, but I think it's time they've got disrupted themselves. I guess a lot of regulatory focus too, and which is why I think it's very important to manage the risks around fintech. Now, the kind of risks that exist obviously range across the fundamental three domains of people, process, technology. And I do think that the big ones, and I'm sure my more able colleagues on the IT and cyber side will expand a little more on it, but definitely the top one is the cyber risk and the risk around ransomware and phishing attempts that we see happen across the financial processes, and specifically on the payment side, where I have seen this proliferate a lot more. Apart from that, I think the other big risk that I would mention about leaving the whole IT domain is also around the people, the whole talent part. Okay, how well are the people positioned to tackle this risk? How much have we upgraded the entire employee base that is dealing with fintech to be able to understand the risks, and then of course go the second step of making sure that we put in controls to mitigate the risk. And the third part that I'll mention, and I'll let my other esteemed colleagues chime in, is around the whole integration of process with technology. I think that to me is a very big risk where we do introduce the financial technologies to enhance the user experience. But I think what we really need to also focus on is to make sure that how are we integrating that back with the entire process steps to ensure that we are not missing any critical piece. And last but not the least is the fact that in this whole fintech piece, we are entering into vendor partnerships in a very big way across the fintech world. So I think the whole process around vendor governance definitely needs a rethink on how we are integrating these service providers into the network.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think no, that's a very very critical preliminary input. Jyoti, thank you so much for that. You touched upon, of course, since the whole conference is built around security and privacy. So the cyber risk which we mentioned and the systemic cyber risk in the overall financial ecosystem. So somewhere or other it has been underestimated, and the attacks and the breaches have time and again reminded us or reinforced the kind of the underestimation part that we have done to it. So let me bring in Navaneethan here. So Navaneethan, if you were to shed some light on what are those key cyber risks for the overall financial, processing ecosystem, because you have been associated with this domain for a very very long time. So what are those key cyber risks that you would like to enumerate?
Great, Aditya, and a very good afternoon to everyone. And thank you so much for having me here. It was an awesome panel. And in addition to Jyoti, really just would like to highlight the key stuff from the cyber standpoint as well as the fraud standpoint, what's happening at the banking side. So if you see this, maybe the top 100 unicorn which has come across India in the last few years, maybe close to 22%. It's purely on the banking side. The scaling up, it's all the things that's happening. It's because of the technology, as rightly Jyoti has mentioned, the people, process, technology, governance, and the technology is the one just playing very significant role. And if you see this in terms of fraud standpoint, like it's really triple. I mean, the last 2 years, it was like 2020, it's 9.84 billion, but now it is close to 33 billion of only on the the fraud side. That's why just fraud wise, it's really gone up, and it's a beyond than whatever we had it. Coming to the cybersecurity standpoint, we have the bigger challenges is SaaS security. As a fintech, if you see that where we have a limited product, it's inbuilt. Most of the things just we have a supply chains, right? I mean, just in terms of onboarding, there is other vendor, verification, there is other vendor. Similarly, each area that's like where we are plugging in multiple vendors, right? So really, we are not sure. The people will have a perception whether it is the SaaS product or IaaS or the PaaS, right? So those areas we have a lot of challenges. As rightly we have seen a lot of supply chain attacks from the end to end. That's the first foremost one. Just I can say. The second one is in terms of the API security. If you see this current situation, so maybe if you go back 15 years back, if you want to connect the bank, really we need a physical internet connectivity. Now just wherever you are, just you can do the complete the API security from the end to end. Just you can get and put the post where you can pull out all the informations. So where most of the attacks, if you see this top 10 attack out of just maybe 4 to 5, it's a purely on the AP related one, which is not secured, which is not checksum is not enabled, or its end to end encryption is not done, or maybe the server validation is not done. So that's a level of things it's happening on that. And the third point is in terms of identity and access management, whatever it is. It's maybe the one CIO and then CISO. It's very difficult to tell them. It's like a one click. How many people have access to the database, and what's the level of access to the database, right? That's one the little bit on the the bigger challenges which is happening on the overall the fintech industry. And next very interesting is the key management. So very simple example, if you want to tell, let us take I have a key rotations policy or the key management or the service accounts management. So I have created maybe close to the 10 to 50 service accounts which I have embedded with my the entire application. But once the employee leave the organization, so nobody change the service accounts in the credential. It remains same actually. So that
Yeah.
leads to the the major attack of across the industry as well as specifically on the the banking side.
Correct.
Uh, the next point is it's a fundamental which is missing. It's a data governance. From the end-to-end standpoint, of course, from data privacy standpoint, data protection standpoint, data governance play very significant role. Like from the where the data is originating, where it is, processed, where it is stored, and then where it is getting transferred. So all the information needs to be governance, the end-to-end. That's really missing over there. Maybe the last and it may not be the least one. It's like a continuous attack surface management. If you see this earlier stage, where we
Yeah.
have a limited, the PCDSS standpoint, like quarterly once, if you do the assessment, it is absolutely fine. But
Yeah.
currently, every day there is attack surface. It's keep changing. So that's why just where we are missing on the continuous, the attack surface management, which need immediate and high priority attention with it. So love to listen from all the leaders. Over to you, Aditya.
Right. No, thank you so much for that enumeration. I think you mentioned very, very key aspects, especially with regard to API security and SaaS security. So, Harish, again, you having from that security background, and you have been looking at the security and compliance for Publicis Group, right? So, both, I think Jyoti and Navaneethan talked about vendor governance, vendor management. So, starting with this, how vendor governance and how vendor management are critical. They can turn out to be a key risk. We talk about the third party risk, fourth party risk, and the nth parties. So many risks proliferating from there. So, what's your take on that? And in addition to it, if you would like to add to some of the more cyber risks, in addition to what has already been covered.
Definitely. So, as Jyoti and Navinthan has already covered most of the part. So, first we have to understand there is a risk which has been increased nowadays. Like pre-pandemic, we have something, and it is almost double the number of attacks, number of incidents,
Yeah.
and the cyber risk. It is increased. It is almost double and triple after pandemic is almost an over. So because see, we have moved more on the internet, as Navinthan has mentioned that yes, people are starting using online banking. Like I'll talk about the banks as an example. So people are starting more into the digital transactions that happened. Like recent government has also launched a numbers that yes, the digital transaction is almost double. Like people have started using online banking, net banking. That's why the surface attack surface increased for the malicious actors, and they have also started thinking very differently. Now they are not thinking about just gaining the financial information, or they want to just spoil the reputation of the organizations. So in that two aspects, like cyber risk, just definitely as API security and SaaS, Navinthan has covered. So more into that cyber security, we have a usage of cyber cloud security, like cloud is also again like increased, because pre-pandemic we were more like organizations have a thinking of having the premises environment on kind of stuff. But yes, during pandemic, we don't have, like, nobody has an option, everyone has to work from home situation. Yes, then the usage of cloud is also increased, and when the usage of cloud is increased, the risk is also increased with respect to that. Like we have a lot of risk with respect to cloud API security. Navinthan has covered. So we have a misconfiguration, which is the most common. Yes, container security, like we are using containers, and we should think about the what all the security and what are the risks pertaining to that is there. And apart from these cloud securities, yes, we have a phishing is increased, insider threat, and ransomware attacks. So these are the few basic threats which are there for not specific to financial, but yes, for all these sectors, I'll say. Like phishing, I was like studying one research, like, and the numbers were there. The phishing attacks is increased by 60 to 70%. So the way of phishing is totally changed now. Now it is not like a normal email you are getting, and if you are clicking, you are getting fooled. No, the attackers is also changed the phishing, the way of handling or sending the phishing spams emails. So they have changed their actors also. So it is very easy for nowadays for normal employees to get it fooled and get into that. So it is very challenging for the organization as well to handle and tackle those situations, how they manage and how they will take the understand these risk, and they can mitigate it basically. Because if you understand the risk better, then only you can mitigate it better in that way. So these are the few things you can say. And apart from these cyber risk, one I was studying about the credit score. Like in financial sectors and banks, we all have the credit scores. Based on that, we get the loans and all. So I was studying, yes, there is a like kind of a fraud or like risk is pertaining to that bias credit score is also there. Like people, like you can get your credit score as you want, like that is also possible nowadays, so you can easily get the loans, and it's possible. So that is the other type of credit score based risk, is money laundering and all is there.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are the common things.
Yeah, no, I think that gives us at least a first table understanding of the different kind of risks, and specifically pertaining to the digital finance. So moving on, we have talked about the type of risks that we need to account for. I think it's very very important to understand how some of these risks are actually translating into events and incidents. And we all know there are ramifications on multiple levels for enterprises who are grappling with these attempts on a daily basis. So Neeti, if I can bring you in at this moment, so in your experience that you hail from the business resiliency and cyber crisis management, so to speak, the BCP DR part of it, which is again very very important.
Yep.
So in your opinion, what are some of those risks actually materializing into events or incidents, or in your experience rather, and again the associated ramifications for the enterprises?
Thanks for that, Aditya. I'll just kind of bring in a little perspective before I start on that one.
Yeah,
We all know that, one, we are more connected than ever, right?
yeah, yeah.
We have digital workforce that's kind of, we still work in hybrid modes, and multiple people are still working from homes. And add to it the complexities of video conferencing. You got privacy issues that we just spoke about. We talk about phishing attempts and ransomware attacks. And imagine, a lot of these people getting kind of calls, posing as, from, let's say, your client side people, and really calling out, hey, I need some of this information because I'm calling from XYZ client that you're supporting. And that kind of information is available to them. So, I mean, imagine if one, or, a few people here and there kind of simply kind of share that information. Imagine the kind of threat it poses, right? So I'm just kind of bringing in a very on ground kind of situation. I am not getting into too much of technology aspect, but on ground, what challenges that a lot of people, really face, and a lot of organizations really face. uh, just to bring in a perspective on, the number of security incidents within the country, in the last year almost we had about 14 lakh incidents. Now imagine in the first 2 months of the year itself it went to about 2 lakh plus incidents. I mean, look at it. Most of these events that we're talking about, they have a financial backing to it, right? They are purely with a financial intent, and that is why, mapping, some of these risks and looking at some of these incidents from a fintech sector are absolutely essential. I'll just call out some incidents and some data maybe that may be helpful for everyone. For example, like Kapelski, they reported that they detected almost like 1,500 fraudulent global sources that were targeting crypto investors and users that were interested in mining. They kind of prevented almost 70,000 such attempts. I mean, that's a big number. uh, our intelligencies, including the FBI's, they have warned that scams involving ATMs, QR codes, and also cryptocurrencies, they are on the rise. I know cryptocurrency still takes a backseat when we talk about India, is still far behind many other countries, but the numbers are, they really speak a lot. Then we're talking about, the trading platforms that have faced security breaches that have resulted in hackers withdrawing like millions of dollars in terms of assets. We have attacks on, the decentralized finance platforms. We have attacks on banking platforms, where in different countries, they've been attacked. There have been money withdrawn. Coming closer to India, even, I mean, I don't want to directly link it up, but things like, a UIDAI kind of an event where, the Aadhaar information for several people, I mean, kind of available to the hackers. I really can't imagine, if that materializes into a fraud, or that materializes into, an attempt of that nature. I mean, it's going to be huge. So just wanted to bring in that perspective for our leaders to really talk about and see what we can do next, right?
Right, right. Jyoti, again, we are talking about the translation of risks into actual events, on-ground events. So Neeti did give a very good perspective around how different facets of digital financial ecosystem is being targeted, and we are all, kind of in agreement, and there is no two ways about it that the situation is grave on ground, as she talked about. What, in your opinion, if you, what's your take on the risks actually materializing into events and incidents, and how effective organizations, or how successful rather I should say, have been in preventing that translation, so to speak. Jyoti, you're on mute. Yes.
So I think we did cover a lot of the data around it. And I think, in my experience, and as I think a lot of you know, I come from an ITS company which services nearly all Fortune 500 companies. So, for us, in my prior job, the main service line was accounts payable, or P2P, as we may like to call it. Now, in P2P domain, what you actually end up seeing is a lot of phishing attempt. And did we see phishing attempts? The answer is yes. And I will continue to say that, and I always stress a lot on this aspect, that all the risks that materialize into events, okay, one, of course, is the ransomwares which we have seen across the globe, and that is due to the failed firewalls or the breach of the firewalls, etc. But I think one of the biggest links in all this is people. Okay, if you look at even the breaches that have happened, one of the top reasons is stolen credentials,
Hmm, hmm.
right? Which
Yeah.
again boils down to people. And I think a lot of the aspect of access management, which Navaneethan spoke about, I think becomes extremely critical, because wherever we saw such attempts happen was essentially where accesses got compromised. So I think all of the risks that we're talking about, whether they're fructified into events or not, the answer is absolutely yes, they have.
Yeah.
And we have enough and more evidence across the globe. So I
Right.
think, without much ado further, we should all jump into saying, what are the different kinds of responses and mitigations that we can see around here. So I'll hand it back to you, Aditya, because I think I can go on and on talking about the different kinds of incidents that we've seen. But the one that's fascinated me always the most is not just the breaches, but the one where I actually read an incident which happened in UK, where a CEO's voice got impersonated and resulted in close to 17 million pounds breach. So I think, to the point where I think Neeti or Navaneethan mentioned, phishing is no longer restricted to saying you're getting an email and you click and it's happened. It's phishing, it's stolen credentials. It could just be anything apart from just the tech part of what we're tackling about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. No, I think that is helpful, Jyoti. So I think, after having deliberated a bit on the type of risks that exist in the ecosystem, and of course the list is endless and it is growing day by day, and how some of these risks might be fructifying, as Jyoti mentioned, into events, and also as Neeti mentioned, I think it's important for us as a group to look at some of the important mitigation strategies, which are being deployed by organizations to counter the risks as part of the risk treatment. And since we are focusing on the fintechs and the financial services, so I would like to bring in Navaneethan here. So Navaneethan, you also in your previous tenure and also in current role, you have been in on a daily basis. Of course, with so much going on ground, whether you talk about the recent CERT directives or all the different kinds of interventions being planned by the government, I think that systematic treatment of the cyber risk is no longer an option for the enterprises, and especially in the financial sector, which is a critical information infrastructure sector as designated by NCIPC, but also kind of a prime target for prime target for the malicious actors. So if you were to talk about a few mitigation strategies, which could also serve as some of the takeaways. I'm not jumping directly to the last point of our recommendations thing, but I'm just talking about the initial mitigation strategies with respect to some of the risks that you all have enumerated.
Amazing, Aditya. No, no, it's a great point by Jyoti and Neeti in terms of incident management. Just to conclude, like how to, it's more of a two-way, right? One is to detect
Right.
and then prevent, like how we can take it care of. Like the
Right.
prevention is always better than the other stuff, right? So that's
Absolutely.
what is always we look. And moreover, just if you see this current ransomware attack, I mean, until unless if he's real challenges or the impact, the people don't get into that the real issues or the impact. But if you take a fintech, it is absolutely money, the flowing on the wire, right? I mean,
Yeah.
anywhere just I can tap it and then I can do just whichever way we wanted. So that angle really just I need a very holistic approach. The organization should have a, in terms of building cybersecurity as a culture. It should not be like a one function who is enforcing some controls for some department. It's not way, right? It's like only the WAF and firewall and a couple of controls what we enforce. It won't help. It's really the people related stuff where we have to do a lot of things. Like rightly she had mentioned, the phishing play very significant role, right? Which the technology might not have a control. It's absolutely the people related stuff. So here we need a very holistic approach, which needs to be bring as a culture, security embedded culture as part of each and every functions, each and every operations. That helps a lot to take it up. That's a point number one. Point number two, from the maybe if you have in-house security, really just we need a little bit shift left the concept in terms of OPSEC, development that play very significant role. I mean, it should not be a like in the postmon job, right? Once the product is out, then they do the VAPT into the what is the vulnerability. From the design phase itself, really just we want to ensure that shift left is taken care, and all the application is coming, without flaw and then other stuffs and all. So third point is if you see just architecture standpoint, now we are coming with a lot of product, but irrespective of product, really we have to embed a process which is aligned with the zero trust architecture. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
whoever it is accessing, whether it is we should go with the very least privileges, or really we need to know, need to know basis to provide access, from end to end. So that point very, the clear on that. The fourth important point is in terms of the incident management. So right now, if you see the thin line between the personal data and then official data, right? Because since already we are in remote, everybody handle official data in mobile, everybody handle the personal data in the laptop. So that's where the segregation of asset, segregation of data play very significant role to bifurcate in terms of the incident, what's happening over there. So it's like a key step, which really, if you enforce this four pillars, really, which will add a lot of values to bring this a culture at the same time to take it as a very effective in terms of resiliency as well as the overall incident management.
All
What
right.
do you?
Yes, yes, that definitely helps. So, Harish, would you like to add to this list of some of the risk mitigation strategies which Navneethan listed out? So, any additions from your side?
Yeah, so like we discussed about the phishing. So I was just attending one of the event yesterday, and we were discussing like just phishing is increased, how we can mitigate, how we can handle the phishing attacks. So like we were discussing, there is a technology and the solutions coming up in the market which we used has a like normal stuff earlier. Like I will name one like CDR. So CDR is basically technology, and it's a solution which is available, and in which like normally what happens, the solution works is like you get an email, and it will scan the your email content, and it will give you as an image, or it will give you as a static content. Like it will remove all the links, it will remove all the macros, it will remove everything out of that. So that content, and basically it's a content disarm and restructuring. Basically it does the restructuring of the content what you are getting over the emails. So that CDR is a new technology which is very helpful in the phishing, because phishing, as Jyoti mentioned, that yes, it is changed. Now we don't have only the phishing, we have a phishing, spear phishing, a lot of stuff, new stuffs are there. So we have to work on those new technologies and tools also. We have to think, okay, how we can mitigate those solution, we use those solutions to that. And now like there's another thing, now everyone is heard about the ransomware as a service. So that is another a big risk for the organizations, because malicious actors, they are using, they are taking this ransomware as a service. They don't need to do anything, they have to just use the service, stand up phishing, and that's it. And people are really getting fooled out of it, like they're getting into it immediately. So that is very easy. So those services are available. And mitigating those, yes, definitely we have to just work on our basics, I will say. Once our like basics in the ransomware, so mostly the ransomware is kind of a, or any kind of attack or incident happen for the organization, so it is moreover on the exploit of any kind of vulnerability. So if for any vulnerability is exploited, so we have to work on the, we have to timely patch our systems, we have to change our accounts credentials on timely manner, we have to increase our monitoring capabilities, and most important is the awareness. For any organization, awareness is the most important, and you have to more aware your employees and staff. Then they should know how these kind of stuff, and these are the risks there in the market, and how they can safeguard them. And there's a risk, I'll talk about the last one, about the insider threat, which is most important and the most common in
Yeah.
any organization. So
Right.
insider threat, definitely it's a risk. We have a lot of solutions, behavior analysis and all, but yes, those are not 100% proof. And we are talking nowadays about the zero trust, where we are not trusting anyone, and we are asking, putting a lot of controls for each and every employee, or any, even for the administrators to, before coming to the environment, they have to provide certain controls, they have to use certain controls. So that's the zero trust we all are talking in the market. Yes, it is there, we have to use it. So these are the certain mitigation steps, and a lot of solutions are there coming out in the market newly. So like one and the last one I will say, and I'll give the other panelists an opportunity to speak on the mitigation one. I was like, we were discussing about the RBI. So RBI is a remote browser isolation, and it really helps the organization to for in kind of a suspicious websites and all, because the proxies and the web security, we are using the solutions. So those solutions give you the allow and a block. What about the suspicious websites? So we have the those kind of solutions, RBI remote browser isolations kind of solutions in the market, which can help the organization to browse the malicious and suspicious websites on the isolation environment. And we can save our environment, and like endpoints and the servers where the user is accessing the corporate machines, and we can secure those machines using these technologies. So these are the definitely fused areas, like we can work together, and definitely we can use it in our environment.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Harish. So we also have Sanjay. Sanjay, you just joined in the nick of time. Of course, before I come to each one of you, seeking the recommendations, with respect to how do we actually overall, come up with a framework. I know it's too short and a too restrictive a time zone or time slot to come up with a very, very effective governance framework. But certainly we can each contribute as 2 to 3 recommendations. But before I do that, I would like to bring Sanjay in. So Sanjay, you come from that tech background wherein you have been leading the engineering efforts at MySQL and also the code development, technology development piece. So till the time you joined, so we have talked about the key risks that exist. Everybody has touched upon that, especially from the financial standpoint. Those risks being translating into incidents, and finally we talking about some of the mitigation strategies. So, what, in your opinion, given your background and the work that you have been doing, can you enumerate some of the response mechanisms which, in your opinion, could help the companies operating in the digital financial ecosystem in that particular space to effectively manage their incidents and to operate or to achieve some sort of resiliency from a cyber standpoint?
Right. So I think the way I'll start about it is the first thing is you have to basically enumerate your risks. You need to understand that hopefully it should not happen. So there are
Yeah.
multiple things. In fact, I talked about how we look at the framework is created so that there are compliances in there. GDPR, it has to be basically compliant, and those kind of force you into not getting into a bad situation. But I mean, the way the hackers are going, absolutely there will be problems that people are going to face. There are going to things that are, I mean, things that are going to happen. So I think two most important things, mitigation strategies. or basically post things are, one is that you have to have an audit trail. You need to know that what exactly happened, what kind of data was compromised, because once you know what is compromised, you can always take care of it, right? You can say,
Yeah.
okay, this data is compromised, these passwords have been given up. You can talk to those users and make sure that they change their passwords or whatever it is. So you need to know exactly what has happened. So audit is extremely important. And remember, audit has to not be in where your data is, because if your data is breached and at the same time your audit logs are breached, there's a problem, right? So you have to make sure that your audit as your data is kept totally separate, and basically the audit is accessible by audit trail. Basically data is accessed by very few people and kept very very secure somewhere, so that you know exactly what has happened. It has to be up to date. It has to not, nobody can be able to, your regular even DBAs should not be able to tamper it, because as far as if there is somebody who's coming into your network, they don't want to be detected, right? And they would like to delete all those audits, so you have to keep your audit data separately. And the second life insurance policy that I talk about always is that you have to have a backup. And this backup has to, you know, not only do you have to keep a backup, and given today's snapshot kind of mechanisms, backup is very very fast. You can take today backups with a snapshot in within seconds. But again, remember, when your when your disk is breached or when your infrastructure is breached, the guy who's your backups can be also spoiled. So again, once you have taken a snapshot, it has to be saved into a place which is separate and kind of more secure, right? And since these backups can grow, I know all large companies, for example, G's of the world and those people, they are still using tapes to take care of it, and there are compliance requirements that I have to keep it for 6 months, right? So you have 1 terabyte of data, and you have to keep it for 6 months, and you're doing it every hour. So you can imagine, there is 24 into 1 terabyte every day, or if it's a 1 hour thing, so 24 into 1 hour, you have 24 terabytes of data coming every day, right? So you need to think about this, right? And people say tapes are regressive technologies, but they're coming back, so you have to look at that. So for me, mitigation strategies are, what I have seen, maybe other people can contribute, are basically two. One is audit, and ensuring a very very tight and secure backup.
Right, right, absolutely, absolutely. So, thanks, Sanjay, for that, important feedback. So, I wanted, what to come out of this session. In fact, when we were discussing as a panel before the deliberation, we wanted the delegates to have some level of takeaways from us, from the experts, from you experts. So, I just want, if we as a group could come up with a robust, framework to meaningfully and effectively govern the security challenges, where security governance becomes a big pain and a big hurdle to cross, is that even the smallest of incident can have those large ramifications if left unattended. So that is kind of the basic premise of security governance. So I am talking about security governance in the context of digital finance. So if we were to look at the pillars of that framework, we talked about having the right skills, we talked about having a kind of a good inventory of risks being prepared. We talked about various different strategies, but that governance framework, I'm sure there would be different. If we were to talk about that encapsulate, if we were to envision that encapsulate, how that would look like. So, what are going to be those different pillars of that governance framework? If I could, request the panelists, each of the panelists, to contribute their thoughts to it. Starting, we can start with Jyoti. Jyoti, if you can, get us started on that overall security governance framework for the digital finance. How do you envision that basically?
Sure. So, Aditya, I think we touched upon, acknowledging and assessing the risks, which I think Sanjay spoke about. So that's actually the first pillar, really. After the first pillar, I think the second thing which we should really focus on is creating the awareness. To me, that's critical across the entire employee population. So creating that training awareness, be it through specific trainings around it, or tailor making the training with respect to the kind of profiles that are working on the processes, is extremely important. One of the things that I've seen work extremely well is creating risk champions
Yeah.
within the first line of defense, because I just think that there is a limited number of people in the second line of defense, and or the third line of defense who would do the audits, etc. But what is critical as a pillar is equipping your first line of defense. So I think creating that risk awareness and creating the champions is absolutely critical. And the third pillar that I would want to leave everyone with is actually developing a solid assurance program. So, yes, pull together your risks, pull together your mitigation strategies, put in the controls, and then figure out a way where you're assessing it on a certain frequency and putting it up to the governance bodies. It's extremely important. Risk assessment is not a one time task, it's a continual piece. So you have to keep refreshing that landscape, and that can only happen if you keep performing the assurance on a continual basis. So I think those three pieces, if we continue to do well, fingers crossed, none of us should really uh, have any breaches and be safe and sound. That's what I'll leave everyone with.
No,
Yeah.
indeed, indeed.
But
That's very, very.
if I can just add a little bit to Jyoti, I think this is perfectly exactly. You need to assess it. You need to have champions in it. But one of the things that you need to absolutely do is test this out.
Yeah.
So create these situations. Okay, I have
Yes.
backup. Let me just restore the backup and see what is happening. Let us create a place where we say, okay, the data is breached. You may not do it in production, but there has to be a way in which you test out your policies. So you need to say, okay, this has happened, recover now, and maybe create a, create a problem, create a real problem, break those things. If there are servers that need to put down those servers and see, right? If, I mean, I'm not saying compromise users data, but create those scenarios. Like, our army basically keeps practicing. They go into kind of these wars that are not really happening and get tested. So these things have to be tested online. I've seen many places where we have a beautiful backup and we do this and we say, okay, now try and restore it. And then actually for the last 3 months people don't really have real backup, because which it can't be restored. So if you
Yeah.
have a
No, I
backup, it
agree.
can't be restored. I mean, yeah. Jyoti.
No, I agree. And I think, Sanjay, you whatever you said actually culminates into saying simulations.
Yes.
And I think I totally agree. We need to have simulation. And actually, I've seen that work extremely well, where we can perform simulations at all levels across the organization and specifically the top management. I'll continue to say that it's extremely important because that's where the firewalls get breached the most.
Yeah,
So, because those are the profiles that are easily available on the net, everybody knows them. We're all out there on the social media. So, it's extremely important to educate that that level of hierarchy where you perform simulations and, to Sanjay's point, test out the scenarios. I think extremely important to do that.
absolutely. And Neeti, before I bring you in, to answer this particular aspect, so I would want you to answer this question from two very, very important aspects which directly pertain to your work profile. One is that we
Yes.
are simply we are also talking about resiliency by design, or being resilient by design. And secondly, we are talking about having a robust crisis management plan. And as Sanjay very, very rightly pointed out, and also Jyoti, it needs to be stress tested. Your plans need to be stress tested, right? So if you can, respond to this governance framework from those two viewpoints, from the resiliency standpoint and from a crisis management standpoint, which are your forte?
Something, that's actually an interesting question. And when people technically, I would say historically used to look at it, they used to consider, hey, business continuity and resilience is separate from cyber. Cyber security is different and this is different. Technically what is needed is marrying the two, right? Because you're talking about critical infrastructure here, you're talking about your people here, you're talking about your processes here. So everything technically has to be recoverable, it has to be resilient. Today it's not a question of whether I will be attacked, do I have the right tools, have I trained my people. It's about when I will be attacked. So if something's happening, how fast I can recover is most important here. And that's where, some of those simulation tests that we just talked about come in handy. And you have to perform those stress tests, bring in your complete side down kind of a test, and then, let's talk about how do you recover, or do your complete data center down kind of a test and see how fast you're able to, recover your clients' businesses, and you're able to recover your financials and other things, right? So all that stress testing and all that stuff is an absolute essential. And resilience has to be brought in at all levels. It's right at the stage when you are preparing, which is identification stages. It's also about at the stage where you are deploying your tools. It's also about your response and recovery elements. So I would say it's a complete picture in whole, marrying the two and just kind of getting going.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you so much for bringing that perspective because that was what I was looking forward to. The crisis management, since we have termed operational resiliency as part of the
Yes.
session, so I think we can't afford to miss that. So,
Yes.
Navneethan and Harish, starting with Navneethan, that governance framework, Navneethan, we talked about this earlier as well. So that governance becomes very, very critical when you're talking about securing your, financial supply chains, so to speak. So then, what would be your key pillars? If you were to, come up with that robust governance framework, what would be, the key pillars, especially from cyber standpoint, and also something which caters to one very, very important thing that you talked about in your initial remarks, the frauds part of it. We are, separately dealing with frauds as a subject as part of this conference, but I also wanted this group to bring in that dimension of, how do you actually govern and monitor the rapidly increasing frauds.
Absolutely, Aditya. No, that's a great leaders highlighted. It's a very fundamental stuff as a holistic approach, which
Yeah.
is really missing in the the current trends. I mean,
Yeah.
the CISO will take care of this all the perspective, but however the enforcements, it's a little bit lagging. So the holistic approaches play very significant role. What are the controls you take? People will say, yes, I'm PCDSS certified, but still it's a hackable, right? I mean, I can penetrate to the network, I can do the whatever it is. So we should not have the the compliance mindset. If I'm comply with maybe the 10 the compliance area, maybe ISO, PCA, SANS, NIST, CIS, all the things, I'm super the excited in terms of we have protected from all the threats. It's not the case, right? It is absolutely we should have the hacker mindset. What are the groundwork? It should be the hacker mindset. If anything, what are the control enforcements? Whatever we are doing across the organization, it should be consistent.
Yeah.
That's the third point. Fourth one is continuous enforcement. You should not do it only during audit, right? I
Yeah.
mean, from Indian standpoint, we have it. There is audit coming over there. Just shall we prepare and then get ready? That's not way, right? I mean, really, it should be a continuous enforcement. Anytime they can come into the audit, it will be comply with our requirement. When we are reaching that situations, then absolutely we are in the great directions. It may not be on the detection mode. Absolutely, we are in the prevention mode, which add a lot of values.
Right, right. Harish, anything from your side? How do you actually envision this framework? What would you like to add to this?
Yes, definitely. So, okay, before coming up
Mute.
for
You're
any,
in mute, buddy.
hello.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, like for any organizations, before coming up any robust framework, so they have to understand the risk what they have it in the organizations, and based on the risk, they have to work on the mitigations. Because nowadays, what is happening, organizations are keep on adding new technologies into their bucket, and they don't know like what all the risks are there with adding new technologies. So they have to understand those technologies definitely gives an offer a services to the clients, to their end users, to the organizations, but at the same time they are giving the equal opportunity to the malicious actors as well, because their attack service is increased. So malicious actors, they are using those technologies, exploiting those vulnerabilities. So definitely we have to work, organization have to think what is needed for the organization, and those technologies only need to be boarded, and how they can mitigate, and what are the risks pertaining to that. So
right,
after that, definitely, like any organization can use a framework, or can come up with a robust framework, and then safeguard their organization.
right.
Just to add,
Sun,
Aditya, I mean, and
yeah,
this is exactly what I mean. I want to add to what Harish is saying. So in fact, when we get in, any new API, or if we're getting any new component, a part of your governance framework has to be, how do I bring it in? How do I assess the risks that are associated with it? And how do I make sure that those risks are covered? So, for example, and maybe this is not directly related to finance, but when we bring in a new kind of software, there's a complete analysis on, okay, is this now, what is the kind of license it has, what is the kind of hacks that have happened on this. In fact, we also look at which is the company that is, taking care of this. Because if I bring in something new, right, and everything, the risks are there in everything, so and people have to take care of the bugs and everything. So if the company that is taking care of this product, or who's created this product, if this goes out of business, and when I put something into my framework, or my thing, I have to support it for the next 10 years, because I'm guaranteeing my users that for the next 10 years you can use this, right? And if people don't, if I cannot take care of it after 10 years, and there are certain products, for example with MySQL, which we took them in, the company died, and then we had to invest our people to ensure that we are, taking out the bugs, because the security compliances are required and there is a security breach in that, and therefore we need to plug in that thing, right? Because the first day vulnerability we will come to know, and there are the large companies always come to know, or what the latest hack that has happened, and we need to close that hack, and then we have to inform that, okay, this hack is not been closed. So if
Yeah.
that hack is in that part of that software, then we need to ensure that either we are doing it, or the third party that has supplied this thing to us. So that there has to be a very, very strong thinking on what component you bring in.
Absolutely,
This thing. That there has
absolutely.
to be the framework, governance framework has to ensure that you have to have a policy and a way of how you choose your vendors, how you get them in, what is the kind of guarantees you take in.
Absolutely. No, I think this has been pretty useful, especially for me, to listen to all of you, to shed light on various aspects of the overall, whether it's from the incident management or the incident management framework, and how how do you actually achieve that business resiliency or the operational resiliency, especially when we are talking about the matters of finance, and especially when we're talking about digital financial chains, ecosystems that we're talking about. Because the overall conference has been deliberating this aspect from various different dimensions. We're trying to dissect it, right? And this discussion, for me especially, has been very, very useful, in kind of putting everything together. If it is scattered, if it is fragmented, how do we find an intelligent way of bringing things together, is what I myself have learned from you all. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I think Neeti had to drop because she had a hard stop, and frankly speaking, we have overshot a bit, and apologize for that. Apologize for keeping you a bit. But thank you so much, Harish. Thank you so much, Jyoti. Thank you so much, Sanjay. Thank you so much, Navaneethan, for bringing in very, very important perspectives for us today. Looking forward to engaging with you all going forward as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.